We are all lepers. In the Gospel of Luke this week, we find Jesus traveling between the regions of Samaria and Galilee. With this opening line to his narrative, Luke perfectly sets the scene for what is about to come. Samaria was located between southern Judea and northern Galilee, an area often avoided by Jews. Samaritans were religiously distinct from Jews, which frequently led to animosity and prejudice. According to biblical scholars, Samaritans were half Jewish and half Gentile, leading some Jews to believe Samaritans were inferior. This bias towards Samaritans prevented many Jews from traveling through Samaria as they journeyed from the north to the south or vice versa. Therefore, when Luke places Jesus between the two regions, it's very intentional. Jesus is holding space between two different cultures, often at odds with one another. The tension is palpable. As Jesus entered a village in the region, 10 men with a skin disease, most likely leprosy, approached him. However, Luke quickly points out that the men kept their distance, which was both culturally and legally appropriate. Again, masterful storytelling. Beginning with the geographical divide between Samaritans and Jews, Luke takes us deeper into the cultural divisions within the first century world. Leprosy colonies were common in the first century, as individuals with Hansen's disease were forced to live outside cities and villages, away from the general populace. Microbacterium leprae caused discolored and raised lesions to grow on the skin. Additionally, deformities would develop, leaving victims shunned by their communities. The disease was even contagious, often transmitted through direct contact or through respiratory droplets. Therefore, it's quite understandable that precautions were taken with the disease. However, the exclusion of the leprosy communities went beyond mere health reasons. Many felt that some sort of sin or curse from above had brought about the condition. Thus, not only did the disease separate the men from their loved ones and friends, but they often faced unfair ridicule and oppression from their former communities. So, when the men cry out to Jesus, "Master, have mercy on us," they mean it more than any of us could ever imagine. Luke uses the Greek word aleo, which means to have compassion associated with divine grace. In other words, the men are not crying out for a coin or a prayer, but a genuine request for deep, meaningful, and life transformative compassion. So it's at this point I want to stop for a moment to discuss compassion. In his book, The Art of Happiness, Dalai Lama XIV wrote, "Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive." For Christians, Jesus was the embodiment of this compassionate ideal. Wherever he went and encountered people, even those different from him and discarded by others, Jesus demonstrated compassion for them. And it was never a thoughts and prayers kind of compassion. It was a genuine human connection leading to transformative action. In our society today, compassion sometimes is seen as a weakness. Before compassion can be exerted, empathy helps create a connection between people. Empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Then, once that connection is made, compassion can be enacted. Unfortunately, there is an attack on empathy these days. Billionaire Elon Musk and podcaster Joe Rogan recently declared that empathy was the weakness of Western civilization. This flies in stark contrast to the theologian and ethicist Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who wrote from his prison cell during World War II, "We must regard people less in the light of what they do or not do, and more in the light of what they suffer." The world does not need less empathy leading to compassion, but in fact, we need more. We need the kind of empathy and compassion that Jesus demonstrated in his ministry. Jesus displayed empathy and compassion that led to transformative action. He did not let hollow words lie there without concrete action. Jesus, in other words, got stuff done. That's why, upon hearing the cries of the men, he instructs them to go show themselves to the priest. It was an odd request because the men knew how the priest would react when they showed up. The priests were certainly not going to throw down the red carpet for them. The men were taking a risk, but they all walked in faith. As they made their way to the priest, something miraculous happened. The men were healed of their infliction. Remember what this meant to them. Not only was it a healing from a terrible disease, but it meant the men got their lives back. They would no longer be excluded, ostracized, or oppressed. In an instant, their lives were transformed because one person empathized with them and showed compassion. 9 of the men were so ecstatic, they left immediately, most likely to go tell their families and friends. They totally forgot about the ragged rabbi who did this for them. And who can blame them, quite honestly? But one man did, a Samaritan, the half-breed, the outcast, the enemy. The man was so overjoyed. He cried out in a loud voice, praising God. The Greek word describing his reaction means full of glory and honor. In other words, the man was so excited, he just screamed out, "Thanks be to God." But then he noticed the rabbi, Jesus standing there, probably laughing at the man's reaction. The man fell to the ground, overcome with gratitude. Jesus noticed that the other men had already run off in their excitement, but the Samaritan stayed to say thank you. Put a pin in that for a moment as we will return to it, but before we do, let's talk about the significance the Samaritan showed in his gratitude towards a Jew. We often think the barriers that divide us cannot be overcome. There's too much political partisanship in the world. There are too many inequalities to find commonalities. The divisions are too wide. The effort is too great to find common virtues. But gratitude might be the secret weapon when it comes to bridging the gap of differences. When we empathize and show compassion, they can find their mark. And when they do, gratitude can extend a hand of reconciliation. Maya Angelou wrote in her book, Celebrations, Rituals of Peace and Prayer, "Let gratitude be the pillow upon which you kneel to say your nightly prayer, and let faith be the bridge you build to overcome evil and welcome good." Just think where we might be as a society if we showed a tad more gratitude in life. Okay, it's time to take out that pen. Here is something I noticed in the text this week that never occurred to me before. The way Jesus reacted to the 10 men and pointing out that the foreigner was the one that returned, it certainly seemed as though the 10 men were a mixed group of Samaritans and Jews. Remember, Jesus was walking that line between them. We are all lepers, I began this message. Suffering does not distinguish between Jew or Samaritan, Christian or Muslim, rich or poor, male or female, gay or straight, cis or trans, city or rural, Republican or Democrat. Suffering afflicts us all. Therefore, we need to hold empathy and compassion in our hearts, for we never know when we will end up on the outskirts of town. And when we find empathy and compassion, let's remember to shout out in glory because God is still good. Let me end with a personal story. When I was a child, my grandmother took me to the hospital to see my younger brother, who was suffering from a severe asthma attack. It was a bitter cold night in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I picked up the pace from the car to the front door. My pace quickened as I saw an unhoused man approaching us on the sidewalk. I was afraid of the man because as a child I'd been told to fear him, like the one walking towards me and my grandmother. The pace became too quick for my grandmother, though, as she slipped off the curb, hitting her face on the pavement. All I heard was her scream, "Mitch, help!" As I turned frozen, a shadow brushed past me. It was the unhoused man. He knelt by my grandmother, helping her from the street. He told me to go get help as my grandmother's face was bloodied from the fall. Nurses and doctors quickly came outside, ushering my grandmother through the doors to get medical attention. Everything happened so quickly, I forgot about the Good Samaritan that came to our rescue. I looked back down the sidewalk, but the man had disappeared into the night. To this day, I have no idea who the man was for me and my grandmother, but I do know he was our Jesus that night. I left the hospital that night with a valuable lesson in my heart. Fear is the great barrier that divides, but empathy and compassion towards a suffering soul can bridge the divide to bring healing and gratitude. We are all in this life together, friends. So let's start acting like it. We are all lepers in the end, needing Jesus to heal us. Amen.